That's where it began. Jennifer Brown, 43, was not the type to leave things unfinished, especially not her child. She was organized, meticulous, the kind of mother who packed 2 snacks just in case, the kind of woman who triple-checked the oven and locked her doors from muscle memory. So when investigators entered her home later that evening, the details struck them as too still. Her car was in the driveway, her purse was in the kitchen, her keys, phone, and wallet sat untouched on the counter. Groceries she had picked up the day before remained in the bags, never shelved. There was no sign of forced entry, no blood, no visible struggle, just absence. The lead detective that evening, assigned from Montgomery County, later described the scene in his case notes as eerily static. Everything in the house suggested she had only stepped out momentarily, except she hadn't, and no one had seen her since the day before. Jennifer had no known enemies. She lived in a quiet development of duplexes, worked remotely, and was co-parenting her son with her ex-husband amicably. She had no history of mental illness, no recent distress signals. What she did have, according to family and friends, was a new business venture she had been excited about, a small restaurant concept in Phoenixville, co-launched with a man named Blair Watts. Watts was listed as both a close friend and professional partner. He had appeared at Jennifer's home the day before her disappearance and had, according to him, taken her son to his own home overnight. He claimed Jennifer had planned to meet him the next morning, but she never showed. Police flagged the timeline, but with no physical evidence of a crime, the case was officially logged as a missing persons investigation, at least for the next 48 hours. At the request of the family, a K-9 unit was dispatched on the second night. The dog alerted near the kitchen. No blood was found, no disturbances in the flooring, but something in the air triggered the dog's reaction, a hint of decomposition. The alert didn't confirm a homicide, but it changed the tempo of the case. Detectives shifted gears. By day 4, detectives had quietly pulled Jennifer's phone records, bank transactions, and location data. What came back wasn't just activity, it was movement, digital movement. Between 7:30 p.m. and 11:15 p.m. on January 3rd, her phone appeared to ping near her home, then again briefly from a location roughly 12 miles away, Royersford. Then it went dark. Her bank account had also been accessed, twice on the night she disappeared. Both were digital transfers totaling $17,000, wired to a business account connected to Birdie's Kitchen, LLC. The transfers were not pre-scheduled. They were initiated from Jennifer's device. According to forensic examiners, the authentication was manual. By day 5, this case was no longer a missing persons report. This was now treated as a suspected homicide. Watts was brought in for a voluntary interview. He spoke calmly, cooperated, and reiterated that Jennifer was under stress lately. He denied knowing where she went and said he assumed she simply needed time. Investigators noted his demeanor. Too measured, too prepared. But again, suspicion isn't evidence. On the same day, detectives searched the home again with cadaver dogs. The K-9 hid in the kitchen was confirmed. A secondary search revealed an object that had been overlooked during the initial sweep. A broken plastic hair clip pressed between the refrigerator and the wall. One of its prongs was snapped. DNA samples were collected and fast-tracked to the lab. Jennifer's DNA was confirmed on the clip. Unknown male DNA was present in trace. Detectives also reviewed security camera footage from nearby intersections. One traffic cam captured a vehicle, silver Honda Odyssey, matching the description of a van associated with Watts, driving away from Jennifer's neighborhood around 2:12 a.m. on January 4th. The plate was unreadable due to the glare of headlights. None of these elements on their own proved anything. But the picture was starting to take shape. The lead detective later wrote, "It wasn't the absence that haunted me. It was the details that stayed still while everything else moved forward." Over the next 3 days, the investigation would intensify. Forensic specialists combed through Jennifer's digital footprint, GPS logs, and call data. Her last outgoing text was time-stamped at 7:08 p.m. on January 3rd. It was a brief reply. "Sounds good, I'll see you then." The recipient was Blair Watts. She was never seen again after that. The morning after Jennifer Brown's disappearance hit local news, Montgomery County detectives initiated a round of structured interviews. The objective was clear: reconstruct her last 72 hours based on reliable witness accounts, isolate any inconsistencies, and chart a forensic path through the statements provided. The focus was no longer on whether something had happened, it was on who had been in proximity, who had something to gain, and who had reason to lie. Jennifer's mother was interviewed first. Her account was consistent, detailed, and chronologically grounded. She had spoken with her daughter on the afternoon of January 3rd. Jennifer had been focused on finalizing financial documents tied to a small restaurant venture she had launched with a man named Blair Watts. According to her mother, Jennifer sounded exhausted but firm. She had made a decision. She would no longer fund the project unless Watts provided formal documentation proving progress in licensing. That paperwork never came. Her tone during the call had not indicated any immediate distress, but when asked if Jennifer had mentioned fear or conflict, her mother hesitated before answering. She said she felt pressured. That's all she used. Pressured? The word was noted. Next came interviews with neighbors. One neighbor, a woman 2 doors down, recalled seeing a man leaving Jennifer's driveway around 8 p.m. the night she vanished. He carried something, she couldn't tell what, and got into a silver van. She hadn't thought it was unusual at the time. When asked if she recognized the man, she replied she'd seen him at the house before. The same vehicle had been captured leaving the area by a township traffic cam. Investigators now had a visual cross-reference. Timestamp 8:13 p.m. heading west. What was lacking was a clear license plate. Jennifer's close friend and coworker, who worked with her remotely on a contract basis, provided another data point. Jennifer had missed 2 back-to-back morning meetings on January 4th. Unusual behavior for someone described as hyper-reliable. She hadn't texted or emailed anyone to cancel. When the friend tried to reach her by phone, it went straight to voicemail. She then texted, "Everything okay?" It was never read. The digital forensics team began mapping Jennifer's phone activity during this window. Between 6:45 p.m. and 10:30 p.m. on January 3rd, her phone had been manually accessed 7 times. Each time, authentication was via passcode, not biometric. She typically used facial recognition. This behavioral deviation was flagged. Additionally, investigators recovered a forensic log entry indicating the email app had been opened at 9:17 p.m., but no message had been sent. This point was discussed in the task force's 10 a.m. meeting 2 days into the investigation. One senior detective noted quietly, "Someone knew her unlock code, but didn't use her face. That's either careful or desperate." Detectives then turned to Blair Watts for a scheduled in-depth interview. Watts maintained that he and Jennifer were on good terms. He claimed he had spent the evening of January 3rd at home with his son and Jennifer's son, as arranged. He stated that Jennifer had asked him to watch the boy overnight while she took time for herself. No written record of this arrangement existed, and Jennifer's ex-husband, who shared custody, told police this kind of handoff without warning was completely out of character. In a calm tone, Watts described Jennifer as stretched thin and frustrated with how long things were taking. When asked about the missing funds, he became guarded. He denied initiating any transfers and said he assumed Jennifer had processed those as part of their business. When detectives informed him that the transfers had originated from Jennifer's phone, Watts appeared surprised but maintained innocence. His cooperation, however, stopped short of providing his own devices voluntarily. Within 36 hours, Jennifer's son was also interviewed by a forensic child interviewer. According to his testimony, he had spent the night at Mr. Blair's house. He said, "I asked to call Mommy, but he said her phone was broken." The child added that Blair had been using Jennifer's phone to play music on the car ride. That device was later determined to be powered on and pinging intermittently throughout the evening of January 3rd. A subpoena was filed for Watts' cell tower data and home internet logs. Behind the scenes, a second layer of review was forming. Detectives began cross-checking testimony against device metadata and digital footprints. One inconsistency surfaced immediately. Watts had claimed he was home from 6 p.m. onward, but a nearby security camera showed a man fitting his description entering and exiting a convenience store 4 miles from Jennifer's home around 7:12 p.m. that evening. He made no mention of this detour in his initial statement. From a procedural standpoint, this was the shift investigators had been waiting for. A person close to Jennifer had provided a timeline. The timeline now had a breach. It wasn't a smoking gun, but it was enough to widen the aperture. Investigators noted that Jennifer's entire personal and professional identity was tightly structured. Her digital habits were predictable. Same devices, same hours, same routines. The abrupt drop-off, followed by unauthorized transactions and device usage, deviated from every previous behavior model. In the FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit, there's a term, forced silence. It refers to a sudden cessation of digital activity following an event, text, call, banking, email, all gone at once. Jennifer's digital life didn't fade out. It was cut. By the close of day 5, the working theory was no longer voluntary disappearance. It was control, whether physical, digital, or both. On January 6th, 3 days into the search for Jennifer Brown, the Montgomery County investigative team secured a secondary warrant for a full forensic sweep of her home on Stratford Court. The initial entry had yielded no signs of forced entry or visible struggle, but by then, the behavioral indicators, digital and testimonial, were mounting. This second search was not casual, it was targeted. A specialized K-9 unit trained in cadaver detection was deployed. The dog alerted almost immediately upon entry, pausing near the refrigerator before circling twice and sitting near the kitchen island. It wasn't barking, but its signal was decisive. Traces of decomposition had been detected. Crime scene techs moved in. Still, no blood, no skin, no tissue. But when the refrigerator was pulled slightly from the wall, investigators recovered a small, fractured plastic object, what was later identified as a broken hair clip. Beige, standard drugstore brand. One prong was snapped clean. It bore 2 partial fingerprints and trace DNA. Forensics flagged it for expedited testing. This became the first confirmed physical link between the victim's disappearance and potential foul play. Jennifer's family confirmed she wore her hair pulled back almost every day. Her son later confirmed in a secondary interview that the clip was Mommy's usual one. Forensic analysis returned results within 36 hours. One DNA profile matched Jennifer. The second, still inconclusive, was marked as partially degraded male DNA. It would remain on the lab's watch list pending further matches. The entire kitchen was swabbed. One trace chemical test near the island indicated the possible presence of a cleanup agent, ammonia-based. The residue pattern on the tile floor, however, was inconsistent with routine cleaning. It was concentrated in one area, not spread across the room. Investigators noted that the narrow concentration was compatible with localized post-event sanitation. In plain terms, someone cleaned only one spot. Digital records also painted an anomaly. Jennifer's smart home system, which typically logged front door activity via sensor, showed no entry or exit activity between 8:15 p.m. on January 3rd and 7:30 a.m. on January 4th. However, the kitchen light, connected to a separate smart switch, was toggled manually at 11:42 p.m. She wasn't there to flip it. The power company log was cross-referenced. Usage spiked slightly at 11:40 p.m., consistent with an overhead appliance turning on, then flatlined overnight. The implication was simple. Someone else had been in the home after her last known digital activity. The time didn't match any alibi previously provided. Meanwhile, outside, a soil scan was performed beneath the rear deck and along the foundation. Nothing unusual, no disturbances. The ground was cold, hard, undisturbed. Whoever had moved Jennifer, if she had been moved, had not done it through the backyard. There were no tire tracks, no drag marks, and no prints leading away from the home. If there had been a removal, it had been clean and likely vehicular. Back inside, Jennifer's laptop was recovered from a drawer in her home office. It had been powered off, not in sleep mode. That was unlike her. Investigators noted the last active browser session occurred at 6:51 p.m. on January 3rd. Search terms included PA Small Business Grant Update and Birdie's Kitchen Restaurant License Check. One of the links visited, a state licensing portal, was accessed twice within 10 minutes. No further activity was recorded. An external hard drive was also located. It contained financial spreadsheets tracking personal and business transactions. Notably, there were draft documents titled Withdrawal Agreements and Revised Funding Contracts. These drafts, none signed, suggested Jennifer was preparing to distance herself from the venture. According to her sister, who reviewed the spreadsheets later, Jennifer had mentioned getting things in writing this time. Investigators interpreted the documents as indicative of a premeditated boundary, financial and personal, being reasserted. 2 days later, Jennifer's phone activity was reviewed again in conjunction with the house's location metadata. Analysts noted something subtle. A GPS location pinged from her phone placed it near her home at 2:16 a.m. on January 4th, well after all household lights were off and the front door had shown no recorded activity. The signal wasn't strong. It triangulated from two towers, which meant a margin of error. But the presence was there. Paired with the kitchen light activation, it suggested the possibility that her phone, if not Jennifer herself, had returned to the scene temporarily before going dark. This theory raised another question. Had Jennifer ever left the home at all? Detectives began working through this hypothesis by isolating every confirmed digital breadcrumb. Her last personal action was logged at 7:08 p.m. Everything else, bank transfers, light switch, and suspected email logins, occurred after that. None were biometric. By now, the working assumption was shifting. Investigators stopped asking, "Where did Jennifer go?" and started asking, "When was control taken and how?" Behind every data point was a simple reality. Jennifer's home wasn't chaotic. It was careful. Too careful. There were no struggle sounds reported by neighbors. No screams, no crash, no window break. If anything happened, it happened without disorder, with access, with knowledge. Detectives reviewing the forensics made a margin note in the file. There's no forced entry because there was no need for one. The implication was clear. Whoever was involved had been let in, or already had access. By January 8th, the investigation shifted focus from Jennifer Brown's home to the financial ecosystem surrounding her final weeks. Detectives had exhausted the physical evidence available at the residence. There was no body, no direct footage, and no conclusive signs of a struggle. But the digital trail remained active. Every unexplained transfer, unsigned contract, or altered communication became a forensic breadcrumb. The turning point came with the discovery of an entity, Birdie's Kitchen LLC. Registered just months prior, it was pitched as a small, local restaurant concept, offering elevated breakfast food in downtown Phoenixville. Jennifer had spoken about it enthusiastically to friends and family. It was supposed to be her next chapter, something separate from corporate work and closer to her creative interests. The LLC's registration listed two individuals, Jennifer Brown and Blair Watts. The initial review of incorporation documents raised immediate concerns. Jennifer's name appeared on the application, but her signature was missing from the operating agreement. Investigators flagged this. The document had been electronically filed using credentials tied to an IP address, later matched to Watts' residence. Jennifer's home IP had not been associated with any of the filing activity. That fact alone did not prove fraud, but it challenged the narrative that she had initiated the paperwork herself. The timeline was tightened. According to business banking records, a new account under the name Birdie's Kitchen was created on December 22, 2022, 12 days before Jennifer disappeared. The account's primary signatory was Blair Watts. Jennifer was not listed, yet two wire transfers, each $8,500, had been made from Jennifer's personal checking account into the Birdie's Kitchen account on January 3rd, the same day she vanished. Both transfers were completed from her mobile banking app using her usual credentials. But the timing aligned precisely with a window of suspicious behavior on her phone. After 7:15 p.m., her device activity shifted from her standard usage pattern. The inputs were logged as manual entries, PIN-based, not biometric. Investigators took that alignment seriously. When cross-referencing timestamps, forensic techs confirmed that Jennifer's last personal usage, verified through browser cookies and keyboard stroke cadence, was at 7:08 p.m. Everything after that lacked her biometric authentication. The $17,000 wired from her account had been transferred using a login session that began at 7:46 p.m. and ended at 8:19 p.m. The working theory began to solidify. Someone else had access to her unlocked device and moved funds without her consent. From a financial motive perspective, that opened the case. Watts, now considered a person of strong interest, had been facing financial strain. Public records showed liens from unpaid taxes, personal debts exceeding $40,000, and an unsuccessful prior venture involving a juice company that closed under questionable conditions. His name had appeared in two civil filings, both alleging misrepresentation of business partnerships. Jennifer's digital planner revealed she had scheduled a phone call with a small business attorney on January 4th. Notes on the entry read, "Discuss withdrawal, protection clause, equity percent." The language indicated concern about her legal position in the venture. She had made no calls that day. Detectives also reviewed communications between Jennifer and Watts. Text exchanges from late December showed friendly back and forth about recipes, restaurant logos, and marketing ideas. But around New Year's Day, the tone shifted. Jennifer asked for proof of construction permits and lease contracts. Watts did not provide them. In one message she wrote, "If I don't see paperwork by Tuesday, I'm pulling the rest." Tuesday was January 3rd. Bank records showed that the second transfer was initiated at 8:11 p.m. on that same day. That contradicted her stated intention to stop funding, and the digital forensics showed she likely hadn't initiated it. The Financial Crime Unit was looped in by January 10th. Their preliminary analysis concluded that Jennifer Brown had likely been defrauded, and that the restaurant venture may have served as a cover to extract investment under false pretenses. The investigation into Bertie's Kitchen expanded to include wire fraud and identity misuse. It was no longer a missing person case. It was a hybrid criminal probe, with financial deception at its core. The technical team also examined the metadata of the business registration document. While the PDF signature field was blank under Jennifer's name, it showed a creation time and IP address that didn't match any of her known devices. More importantly, the account used to submit the LLC form had been tied to a Gmail address registered under a different name, an alias later linked to Watts. The Gmail account had also received the confirmation of the state filing. Jennifer's email had not. Detectives now believed the business itself, at least in its legal form, was a ghost structure. There was no location under lease, no inspection applications filed, no vendor agreements, just a name and a bank account receiving large transfers from a woman who had since gone missing. In terms of investigative priority, this placed the financial component as a major vector: control over funds, access to devices, a known partnership, and now evidence that Jennifer had taken steps to separate herself. That made the timing of her disappearance not just suspicious, but critical. The human dimension was not lost on the investigative team. Jennifer had been described as thoughtful, precise, risk-averse. Family and colleagues said she never committed to anything without reviewing documents line by line. That pattern of diligence, juxtaposed with unconfirmed transfers and unsigned filings, created a forensic paradox. Someone had overwritten her routine, deliberately. The motive line was evolving, not jealousy, not impulse, but strategic interference, triggered by the looming threat of exposure. Detectives noted in the internal case chronology, subject likely perceived financial fallout, reputational damage, or both. Action taken to eliminate witness before separation occurred. Jennifer Brown was never the reckless type, and the story behind Bertie's Kitchen now appeared to be less about brunch and more about a backdoor exit from liability. On January 18th, 2023, 15 days after Jennifer Brown was last seen alive, Montgomery County detectives received a call from a tip line. A maintenance worker inspecting a vacant property in Royersford reported a strong odor near a utility shed behind the house. The property had been listed for rent weeks earlier, but remained unoccupied. The address matched a location previously linked to Blair Watts through a prior lease agreement, one he had terminated abruptly at the end of December. A crime scene team was dispatched immediately. On arrival, officers secured the perimeter and conducted a sweep of the backyard. Beneath a thin layer of compacted soil, behind the shed, partial clothing fibers were visible. Digging began at 1:46 p.m. Less than 2 feet beneath the surface, a shallow grave was uncovered. Inside, they found a body in the fetal position, wrapped in a gray bedsheet, consistent with those later confirmed from Jennifer's home. Her hands were bound to her torso using duct tape, and a fragment of a broken hair clip was recovered within the sheet. This fragment was consistent in color, style, and break pattern with the clip found behind Jennifer's refrigerator in Chapter 3. The body was not decomposed beyond recognition, though it had begun to break down under low temperatures and shallow burial. No insects were present, suggesting recent placement. Detectives noted the scene had not been treated with any chemical masking agents, an oversight. The odor, even in January, had begun to permeate the area. Identification was formally made via dental records. The body was Jennifer Brown. The autopsy, conducted the following morning, determined the cause of death to be asphyxiation via manual strangulation. No signs of blunt force trauma or defensive wounds were present. Toxicology results were negative. Time of death was estimated between 8:30 p.m. and 12 a.m. on January 3rd, narrowing the window of suspected homicide to a 4-hour frame aligned with Jennifer's last confirmed digital activity. Additional evidence recovered from the burial site included a single latex glove fragment with partial DNA from an unknown male, a section of red nylon rope unconnected to the binding but located near the grave, fresh soil disturbance indicating that the grave had been refilled no more than 48 hours before discovery. Investigators quickly matched the sheet and duct tape rolls found at the Royersford property with receipts found in Watt's trash from 2 weeks earlier. One receipt, timestamped January 2nd, showed a purchase from a local hardware store. Items listed included duct tape, rope, gloves, and a plastic tarp. The forensic chain now linked Jennifer's disappearance, the site of burial, the materials used in concealment, and an individual with prior access to both victim and property. Detectives also re-examined digital records, geolocation data from Jennifer's phone, previously dismissed due to low precision, now overlapped with the Royersford address around 2:19 a.m. on January 4th, an anomaly in her phone's inactive period. It wasn't a conclusive ping, but it helped establish phone proximity to the disposal site, further supporting the theory that the device had been transported along with the body. The Royersford property had no surveillance system. However, traffic cam footage from a nearby intersection recorded a silver minivan, similar in make and model to one used by Watts, traveling northbound at 2:14 a.m. on January 4th, consistent with burial timing. The plate was partially obscured by snow residue. What emerged was a calculated but incomplete concealment. The grave was shallow, the materials were traceable, the route was not fully anonymized. In the weeks following the recovery, detectives reviewed every decision made by Jennifer in her final month. The pending business separation, the demand for documents, the scheduled legal consult. These weren't isolated acts. They were steps toward reclaiming control. And to someone who had relied on her silence, they may have represented risk, financial, reputational, and personal. There was no message left behind, no written confession, but the condition of the grave, the rushed depth, the reuse of household materials, the lack of masking said something else. It suggested urgency. Not impulse, but pressure. Cases like this often leave behind a single choice made too late. Jennifer had chosen to give trust to someone in business. She tried to walk away from that agreement once things no longer felt secure. And in doing so, she disrupted a balance that had never truly protected her. The grave in Royersford wasn't hidden far. It wasn't even locked behind a fence. Just a few inches of earth in a backyard no one had looked at in weeks. Sometimes the smallest distances hold the loudest truths. In the days following the discovery of Jennifer Brown's body, the investigation entered a new phase, one rooted not in search and recovery, but in analysis and contradiction. Detectives shifted their focus to reconciling what had already been said with what the evidence now confirmed. The goal was no longer to find Jennifer. It was to prove what had been done to her and by whom. The subject last seen with Jennifer had voluntarily spoken to law enforcement on multiple occasions prior to the discovery. Each statement had been documented and cross-referenced. On paper, the timeline he presented was stable. He picked up her son on January 3rd, left Jennifer at home, went about his evening routine, and had no further contact. But after the body was recovered, along with physical and digital forensic overlaps, investigators began a systematic review of his statements. Inconsistencies surfaced immediately. He had said he stayed home the entire night of January 3rd, but store surveillance footage placed him at a gas station 3 miles from Jennifer's home at 7:12 p.m., within the window of estimated time of death. He hadn't mentioned that trip. When confronted later, he claimed it was for snacks for the children. Receipts collected from the location showed no such purchase. In an effort to corroborate location claims, a geolocation forensic team examined his mobile device data. On January 3rd, the device connected to a cell tower near Jennifer's home until approximately 8:15 p.m. At 2:19 a.m. on January 4th, it registered a ping near the Royersford property where her body was later recovered. Between those timestamps, the device appeared to travel along a route consistent with movement between the two locations, with signal dropouts near wooded areas. Although GPS precision was limited, the tower pattern aligned too closely with the timeline of the transfers from Jennifer's account and the probable disposal of her remains. The device was active and in motion in all the wrong places. Forensic analysts also revisited the metadata from Jennifer's digital banking session on January 3rd. The session had begun at 7:46 p.m. and was used to transfer $17,000. The IP address did not match her home network. Instead, it matched a known public Wi-Fi router logged at a location previously visited by the primary subject. The banking app had been accessed using a saved login credential, but not biometric authentication. Jennifer's known behavior contradicted this method of access. In over 180 logins to her bank account in the prior 6 months, 100% had used biometric ID. Never once had she entered her password manually from a non-secured network. That deviation was flagged as a behavioral red marker, a sign that someone else with knowledge of her login had accessed her account from an unfamiliar network. Meanwhile, the autopsy data was incorporated into the investigative matrix. Time of death, as determined by stomach contents, body temperature modeling, and early decomposition markers, was estimated between 9 p.m. and midnight on January 3rd. Jennifer had eaten dinner around 6:30 p.m. By the time her body was recovered, her remains indicated restricted blood flow and a complete absence of defensive injuries. No bruising to the hands, no broken nails, no hair fragments beneath her fingers. This suggested she was either incapacitated or never had the opportunity to react. The implication was sobering. The act had been committed with direct physical control and minimal resistance. Investigators also retrieved surveillance footage from a residential street 1 block away from the Royersford property. The footage, while grainy, showed a silver minivan parked across from the shed location at 2:11 a.m. on January 4th. It remained stationary for approximately 12 minutes. No other vehicles entered or exited during that period. This detail supported the burial window. It also matched the minivan seen leaving Jennifer's neighborhood in prior traffic cam footage earlier that night. Though the license plate was still unreadable, the vehicle make and model were consistent across all sightings. When confronted with these growing contradictions, the subject declined further interviews. Legal representation was requested and communication ceased. Behind closed doors, prosecutors reviewed the cumulative findings: contradictory statements about location and timeline, physical materials linking the subject to the grave and to Jennifer, forensic inconsistencies in device usage and financial behavior, deviation from known behavioral patterns, both in the victim and the suspect, no viable alternate explanation for the presence of Jennifer's DNA or the transport of her remains. One note added to the investigative file by the lead detective read, "He knew where she lived, he knew her schedule, he knew how to access her phone, and he knew that she was about to walk away." The motive no longer hinged on abstract tension. It was now directly tied to Jennifer's financial withdrawal from a project her partner couldn't afford to lose. The crime wasn't about anger. It was about loss of access and control. What stood out most to investigators wasn't just what had happened. It was how long someone believed they could keep the story intact, despite mounting forensic pressure. Cases like these remind us that truth, while sometimes buried, rarely stays there long. By the end of January 2023, the case file on Jennifer Brown had grown into hundreds of pages. Each piece of evidence, each timestamp, each financial transaction fit into a larger framework that investigators were now prepared to name: calculated financial exploitation, followed by a lethal effort to silence accountability. The foundation of that motive was embedded in financial desperation. The subject of the investigation, Blair Watts, was under considerable economic pressure. Court records revealed an active lien from the IRS, multiple past-due personal loans, and unpaid child support totaling over $15,000. His previous business ventures had failed. One of them, a juice bar partnership from 2020, had ended with accusations of misused funds, though no charges were filed. Jennifer Brown had represented more than a friend or a business partner. She was a financial lifeline. Records from her personal accounts showed that between October 2022 and January 2023, she had transferred a total of $35,000 to Watts or entities controlled by him. Not all of it had clear documentation. The transfers were frequently described as early investment funds in memo lines, but there were no signed contracts specifying equity terms or repayment. Jennifer's digital notes from December told a different story. One entry read, "He keeps stalling on paperwork. No more money without proof of lease." Another from just a week before her disappearance. "Tired of asking. Need exit strategy." These weren't the words of a willing partner. They were indicators of a person preparing to pull away. From the outside, the venture known as Bertie's Kitchen had no physical presence. No address, no permits, no contractor activity. Investigators had traced the name to an LLC formed online, with documents submitted from an IP tied to Watts's home. Jennifer's name was listed, but she hadn't logged in. No lease agreements were ever filed with the state or local zoning office. No business license had been issued. It was, in effect, a shell. That shell had received over $17,000 in the 48 hours before Jennifer vanished. When financial analysts reviewed the outflows from the Bertie's Kitchen account, they found payments made to 2 personal credit cards in Watts' name, along with an immediate withdrawal of $2,900 in cash. No vendor names appeared. No equipment was purchased. The funds were moved quickly and without traceable justification. Jennifer had scheduled a legal consultation for January 4th, the day after she was last seen alive. The stated purpose, according to her digital calendar, was LLC exit and fund separation. She never made the call. That calendar entry was one of the last digital actions confirmed to be her own. From an investigative standpoint, the motive profile was now fully formed. Jennifer was pulling out. She wanted out of the business, out of the financial entanglement, and out of the informal promises she had made. For someone who had no legal standing without her cooperation, her departure would mean exposure, civil and possibly criminal. In interviews with Jennifer's family, they described how cautious she had always been. She didn't loan money casually. She saved every receipt. For her to have given tens of thousands without protective contracts meant she had placed enormous trust in someone. That trust had turned into vulnerability and eventually into risk. Investigators framed their final motive summary in 3 points. Financial dependency. Watts relied on Jennifer's continued investment to manage existing debts. Impending exposure. Jennifer's scheduled legal action indicated an intent to create distance, legally and financially. Control and panic. When he lost access to funds and faced the likelihood of legal scrutiny, the subject responded not with negotiation, but with elimination. It wasn't a crime of passion. It wasn't spontaneous. It was a progressive pattern of control that ended with premeditated action when the dynamic shifted. One final detail reinforced this. The transfer of $17,000 from Jennifer's bank account had occurred during a window when she was likely already dead. Her phone had been used to authorize the transactions manually, from an external IP, using saved credentials. This was not accidental. This was operational. Jennifer had tried to build something. What she didn't know was that she was the only real thing in that structure. The rest, names, documents, plans, was designed to extract value from her and disappear. The trial of Blair Watts began in December 2023 at the Montgomery County Courthouse. There were no outbursts, no dramatic confessions. The proceedings unfolded in the same cold logic that had defined the investigation. This case was not built on one piece of irrefutable evidence. It was built on pattern, precision, and the absence of viable alternatives. The prosecution presented a streamlined case. They began with Jennifer Brown's final digital footprint, her last verified phone use, the bank transfers executed after that window, her device's connection to a public network not associated with her. They mapped her phone's route, data points crossing from Limerick to Royersford, aligning with the time of death, the body disposal, and the suspect's own device signals. Then came the physical evidence, the duct tape and sheet matching materials from Jennifer's home, the buried body, the partial DNA on a glove fragment, the broken hair clip, one piece from her kitchen, one recovered from the grave. The sheet had been folded in a way that suggested familiarity, not haste. These weren't the choices of a stranger. Jurors were shown the purchase receipts, rope, gloves, tape, acquired days before Jennifer vanished. Surveillance from a gas station placed the suspect in the area at a time he claimed to be home. His minivan had been seen leaving her neighborhood, then later near the burial site. Every movement unsupported by alibi, every explanation incomplete. The defense offered no forensic rebuttal, no alternative suspect, no credible motive to suggest Jennifer disappeared of her own will. Their argument centered on circumstantial gaps, but the case wasn't missing anything. It was simply orderly, quiet, like the grave it had revealed. After a 3-day trial, the jury deliberated for 6 hours. Blair Watts was found guilty of first-degree murder, theft by deception, and abuse of a corpse. He was sentenced to life without parole. He showed no visible reaction. In the days following the verdict, Jennifer's family issued a short statement. She was a mother, a friend, someone who trusted too easily. We hope her story makes others pause before dismissing those early signs. When something feels wrong, it often is. Her son now lives with extended family, surrounded by stability, but not untouched by trauma. He was 8 when his mother disappeared. That kind of absence lingers in ways that don't always speak aloud. The community of Limerick changed, quietly. Trust in familiar faces, in partnerships once assumed safe, shifted. People spoke more carefully. Some reviewed how their names appeared on paperwork. Others simply listened more when a friend said they didn't feel right about a situation. Jennifer Brown wasn't just the victim of a murder. She was a warning carved into the fabric of everyday decisions. How we loan money, how we share passwords, how we let someone into our lives without safeguards. Not every betrayal ends in death, but when it does, it often starts with small permissions ignored, a delay in drawing a boundary, a belief that documentation could wait, that trust could substitute for proof. And yet this case wasn't only about financial manipulation or premeditated violence. It was about how easily control can slip beneath the surface, how silence, especially between those once close, can become the space where danger hides. In the end, the evidence held. The story closed not with a confession, but with a consequence. Cases like Jennifer's don't ask for attention. They demand vigilance, not just from the justice system, but from every person who assumes safety and familiarity. Because sometimes the harm doesn't knock. It's already inside, quiet, calculated, and waiting for the right moment to cut off the voice that might say no. In stories like this, I always ask myself, how many signs do we miss because we don't want to believe someone we trust could hurt us? If you've watched all the way through, maybe you're asking the same. What happened to Jennifer wasn't just about money or betrayal. It was about silence, hesitation, and how easily control can masquerade as closeness. If this story moved you or made you reflect on trust, speak up in the comments. Tell me, have you ever ignored your instincts and later regretted it? Or simply share where you're watching from. I'd love to know who's out there listening. And hey, if this video struck a chord with you, please hit subscribe so you won't miss the next case we unravel together.